Welcome, Divine Goddess, for another episode on Authentically Healed, Women's Trauma Healing Podcast. I am Chloe, your host, your favorite holistic therapist and complementary therapy practitioner. And today's topic is going to be about healing your self-perception. And as you can already, you're probably already imagining and already having some ideas coming through your mind as I mentioned this title and topic. Obviously, self-perception is all about how you perceive yourself, your self-image. That includes, your body image, your perception as an individual, your perception like in all areas of your life, right? It's your overall self perception idea of yourself, of how you perceive yourself, basically. And obviously, our self perception is formed, in our earliest years and stage of life, as from the moment we come out of our mother's womb. It's when we start absorbing everything in our environment. And so, depending on the type of environment we grow up in, the type of parents we have, etc., all the adults around us, but also the kids, this is gonna make us form a certain perception that will either be accurate if we have loving parents and a loving environment that reflects back to us. Nothing needs to be perfect, but relatively well who we are with positive feedback. Well, we're going to grow up into very confident adults and also very like self-aware, self-conscious, and with a positive outlook on ourselves, right? And but if we grow up in an environment where, people get triggered around us, they criticize us or they abuse us, well, obviously we're going to grow up into adults that are going to portray, like, are going to have like an inaccurate perception of ourselves based on all the negative feedback that we received. Whether those are direct, for instance, people criticizing you and tearing parts of you down, like, for instance, oh, you're too much, you're too emotional, you're too this, you're too confident, whatever, that are going to tear down your natural assets and things that are part of your personality and unique to you that you came with at your birth, usually that you will find in your birth chart. So for instance, and so then you're going to start suppressing those parts of you because they will be criticized by people, and you're going to receive negative feedback about those traits. And as children, we have we are we get, if we're not accepted and loved unconditionally, we get into a survival mode, which is a mode where we mold ourselves to, receive love, because as children we cannot survive, you know lacking affection, love, and all the different forms of love, right? So in terms of like affection, presence, emotional presence, and just receiving attention, we need attention and affection. And so if we see as children that we lose that attention and affection because of certain traits we have, we will automatically suppress them. It's just a way to survive as children. It's how human beings are wired in their younger stages of life. So a child will not, think about it. It will just emotionally happen automatically, right? So those are direct, negative feedback to who we are and our core essence. But we can also receive indirect feedback, such as abuse, neglect, and things like that, which are going to put, people are not going to directly necessarily say something specific to us, but the way they're going to behave towards us is going to also forge our self-image and self-esteem. And so if we're neglected or abused, obviously we're going to start feeling a whole lot of negative and emotions about our core self. Not necessarily specific, but we're gonna just feel overall like hate towards ourselves, or if like we get abused or neglected for certain parts of us, we're going to start rejecting them. But if we are overall abused for no reason, we're going to carry a huge load of shame about who we are in general. Like we're going to grow into adults who feel a lot of shame, who don't feel like they can take space in the world, who don't feel like they don't want to make too much noise, they don't want to be, seen, they'd always want to be in the background. As someone who experienced abuse as a child, I so can like I've experienced that, and I'm still growing out of that, because being abused has such an impact on you, in the sense that you emotionally fear for your life when you take up space, right? You feel like your nervous system have integrated that your existence is a problem, right? So you try to be as small as possible. So this can create also very timid children and things like that, right? And so those are the type of indirect feedback that we can get as children when we grow up and forge our self-perception. So this deep feeling of something is wrong with me, for instance, those are typical of abused children, of people who were abused as children. Something is deeply wrong with me because everyone is or the main people in my life, or the people who are the most important in my life, treat me as something is wrong with me, as if I'm a mean person, I'm a horrible person. And so because I'm abused, there must be something wrong with me, right? So any child that also is abused will never grow hate towards their parents. They always, on some level, are going to grow self-hate. So that's when, as adults, we have also a lot of issues with self-destruction, self-harming, and things like that, right? So that's how like our self-perception is created. That's how our self-perception, we forge our self-perception over time in life. So before I get into the healing part and how to heal, your self-perception, I'm going to share a little bit about my story and, my specific experience. So for me, I grew up with, first of all, a lot of shame due to child sexual abuse, but also emotional abuse, and feeling a lot of shame about who I was, and just carrying a lot of shame, and also self-rejection. So this made me grow into, already like in my even pre-teenage years. I think I started even drinking alcohol around 9 years old, so it was very, very early. But I started going into a pattern of self-destruction, and because I had this shame and self-rejection, so I started, drinking, and in my very early, I started displaying behaviors of like having like abuse, like substance abuse, and then also like exploring sexually, but in the sense that like having self-destructing, like dangerous behaviors, such as putting myself in situations where I would be that were not safe, that were not really thought through, right? And also seeking for like men's attention and things like that, and displaying like a very early fascination for sex, but not really in a healthy way, right? And so I having like sexual behavior that was not like that was not coherent with my age. And so this turned me, like as a kid, I was very shy and introverted, and would cry very easily. Every time I would get criticized or did something wrong, I would start tearing up. So this really often a sign that we don't see a lot, but like an abused child will be extremely sensitive to critic and all of those things. And even when we go into adults, like we don't cope well with being criticized, even if it's constructive criticism. But we become very, we become perfectionist. We avoid criticism. We are afraid of criticism because we cannot cope with it, because we then it then reflects back to us this sense of there's something wrong with me, like this whole self rejection, right? So with that, we can get into like a pattern quickly of self-destruction because we cannot cope with a lot of things that are normal in life, right? So in my teenage years, I started behaving like, a certain type of way. And then my best friend at the time like kind of calmed me down and explained to me like you should not behave like that, it's dangerous, because I had an experience once where I put myself in a very dangerous situation. The guy like kind of tried to force himself on me, but he was too drunk, so everything was fine, but I was at his place. And like I went kind of missing. My phone was down. I was with a friend, but I lost her and all of that. And then obviously my mom was called, and my best friend was looking for me and all of that. Like I was really behaving in some type of way. And I would be friends with people who would also be in that type of behavior, right? That would enhance that type of behavior, that I would be able to, like, with whom I would behave that way as well. But then, so after that period of time, I met my first, like, I had my first long-term relationship in my teen when I got older. That turned out abusive, and I like I just felt like, well, because there's something wrong with me, because there's something so shameful about me, there's just something wrong with me. I'm so lucky to have like even just someone who's willing to love me, because I was at that point like my self-esteem was that low. Like I thought any guy who would be interested in me, I would be the one who's lucky because something is wrong with me. I don't deserve to be loved. I deserve to, I'm used to abuse. So someone who loves me is just like never experienced that, right? So I felt so lucky. And so obviously when you have that low of a self-esteem, obviously like being in an abusive relationship is like, you're it's just so easy to get into an abusive relationship. Not that abusers necessarily seek someone who has low self-esteem. That's not what I'm saying, because abusers also, are in like the positive aspect of attracting an abuser is that they actually are attracted to you for positive traits and things that they envy. So if you attract an abuser, is obviously because you have also traits that they envy and that you might not see yourself, but they envy those traits in you, right? So, but it was easy to stay in an abusive, it made me really stay in an abusive relationship because my self-esteem was already very low. And so, it took me a longer time to let go of that person when I realized, like, when it started to become abusive, because I I was stuck in, wanting this person to love me and appreciate me and heal and kind of like repair my childhood through that person. But so because I had a very low self-esteem, I didn't see at first certain signs that were signs of abuse and red flags. Not that you can always spot it, because certain predators are very subtle, and they just, I was with someone like they will test your boundaries basically. So if I had a higher self-esteem or whatever, and a predator would approach me, they would have not said certain things that maybe this person did at that time, because I had an enough low self-esteem that he could try it very early in our relationship, right? Anyhow, so when I came out of this relationship, like what kept me in this relationship was also like this shame I had about myself, this feeling, this deep sense of there's something wrong with me. And this relationship confirmed to me, oh, those traits are negative in you. There is something wrong with you. You're crazy. You have issues. Nobody will ever love you. Like people, like a guy who would say that to me, I would believe, because I already had he was only like the mirror of how I was feeling about myself, right? There's no one will love you. You're too damaged. And that was always something that I felt for a long time in my life. I was damaged. There was something that was broken in me. So I was so like I always had this shame, like something is wrong with me, something like a lot of things about me I felt uncomfortable. My body, I had body image issues. I started developing like an eating disorder. I had also a mood disorder. And like I developed a lot of shame on different parts of myself as well, of my being, right? So this relationship was a catalyst for me when I realized, well, actually, I deserve better. And I am like today, I'm always grateful for this relationship. I will always feel grateful for this relationship because I was really put in a place where I had to choose myself. And by choosing myself and walking away from this relationship and fighting to walk away, because walking away from an abusive relationship is not like just walking away from any relationship, like you get stalked sometimes and things like that. But it really pushed me to see my worth and to like learn that, well, I deserve so much better. Like, I deserve so much better. I am not what like this person is saying to me. I am not damaged. I deserve better. I deserve like, at least I don't deserve to be abused. So it was like a first step of healing my self-perception because I realized, well, no one deserves to be abused. I don't deserve to be abused. Even if let's say I'm damaged on some level or there's really something wrong and like what I feel about myself is true, yet like it's not because someone is damaged that someone like that they deserve to be abused, right? So it put me in a place where I grew a little bit of my self-esteem thinking, well, no one should be abused. There's no way, right? And so from there, I left this abusive relationship. I started working on myself, like, I started like learning more and constructing my self-esteem and making sense and going to therapy and discovering like my past, my issues, my family issues. I started becoming aware of like there's a lot of shit that I'm not aware of and kind of like starting to unpack, my life, like what led me to this point, right? It's not just, you know, how was he able to control me that much? Like, well, there's definitely a lot of things in my childhood that led me to this place, that led me to be controlled that much. How is my self-perception? So over time, like I started like working on that and unpacking and making sense of like my family dynamic, how actually I was dealing with abuse, how I was dealing with different things, different types of abuse, and how I experienced abuse as a child and how it shaped me, right? And so it led me to a path where I started doing things differently. I started doing things that I was afraid of. I started doing things that I always felt like I was not capable of doing, and also started doing things, yeah, that like go on adventure that I wouldn't usually want to go, doing things completely out of my comfort zone, which led me to a place where I realized, well, there's a lot of things that I don't know about myself. Actually, I'm more strong than I might think. Actually, I'm more capable than I think. Actually, I have so much more willpower, and I'm I'm like I'm capable of a lot of things basically, and initially I was going down a path of like studies, and like I wanted to have a lot of different diplomas because I needed to prove to myself that I was useful, that I was not that dumb, or like because I had a low self-esteem, I needed to find something to make me feel like I was capable. But I realized that that I didn't like going after things to prove to me and to people who didn't love me that I was capable was not the solution. And actually, when I started doing things that out of my comfort zone, I started discovering myself, getting to know myself basically. And so I started realizing, well, wow, I can be like, I can be courageous. Wow, I can be this, I can be that. And kind of realizing, well, all the things I thought I knew about myself wasn't really true. Actually, those are things that were just belief systems that I had integrated. But I started then questioning everything that I thought about myself. Is this really true, right? Is this really true? Is this really something that is true? Is it something that I was conditioned to believe about myself, right? So I took this path of like unpacking my beliefs, unpacking like my self-perception and healing my self-perception in like I want like I want to say more like unpacking, not healing yet, but like starting unpacking everything and questioning my self-perception. And so after going through that path, I decided to go, take the route of coaching. I started discovering what really was interesting to me, and I wanted to help people, like, because I started, leading a life that was more aligned to what I liked, and I was just like such a different person in a sense because I just like became someone I always wanted to be but thought I couldn't be. And so I took the route of coaching, and I decided to, at one point, take this route of being able to support other people in their journey of self-esteem and becoming more confident and things like that, right? Before I started, I wanted to blog initially. I wanted to be a writer, but then I took this route because I started having feedback of people when I would interact with them, and they would say to me like, "Wow, like you give such good advice and things like that." So I thought, well, I should take this route, and I saw like a certification program, and I got into contact with a certification program, and then one thing's led to another, and I took the route of coaching, right? So through that route of coaching and through that path of coaching, I was at the same time working, and I had been traveling, and then I had to come back for personal reasons. Things pushed me to come back, and then I decided to kind of settle down in a place and started working and studying at the same time. Right? So at that point, I was just like, yeah, I am going to study again. I'm going to do this and that, right? Although I started seeing that things started to come up, like on emotional level, things started to come up. So I felt confident. I went after what I wanted. I was very much like, didn't feel any like fear or anything. I would just go after what I wanted. And I was just on this path of going forward. But slowly, different things started to show up, such as my body image. I started, I was into fitness a lot at that time, so I started working out a lot. But I started seeing like my anxiety around my body image still there because I had issues with my body image. I started noticing that my ED that I had an eating disorder still. Like, although before I didn't thought like I wasn't aware what an eating disorder was, for instance. I just knew that I had a difficult relationship with my body, but I started noticing like, wow, like that I was dealing with an eating disorder. I might have read something somewhere at one point, but I started seeing that like I started noticing that so oftentimes I would come back from work, and I would just black out and eat everything that was there. And I would hear this voice telling me how fat I was, how ugly I was, and things like that. And I couldn't control it. Like, literally couldn't control it. And I would notice also, like, that sometimes I would also starve myself and things like that, right? And I started also noticing that I had issues sexually, that I was struggling with an addiction as well, that I was also struggling with fitness addiction, like dopamine addiction, basically. Like I would go to the gym literally every day, and would I was reliant on the gym. I was reliant at one point on sex as well. I started changing my diet in a whole food diet, which was positive, which really healed my body. But at the same time, I was still dealing on some level with an eating disorder. And so I started also like, because I was studying nutrition as well. So I started noticing all of those things, right? On an emotional level, there was a lot of things in my life that were not well. Relationship wise, I had issues with commitment. I had also kind of like mood disorders in relationships, like certain toxic traits would come out, fear of abandonment, and things like that. And so I was more in a casual type of like lifestyle with relationships and things like that, because I was really afraid of commitment. So a lot of things started to show up basically, and I started seeing like that I was actually, dealing with also depression, anxiety. Sometimes I would, be in bed chronically and not being able to come out, and I would, I used to put that on, well, I just need to rest and things like that. But sometimes I was paralyzed in my bed, so I started noticing those things, right? And I didn't want to stop because I was afraid. Like I tried to keep like my routine with work and things like that. And it's the moment that I started to I had saved enough money and I wanted to go in building my business and let go of work for a while. And it's when I stopped like working that I started noticing like that I was actually depressed, that I couldn't function, because to that point, work was like giving me structure and kind of made me like be into like a routine, but certain things I couldn't see with like that routine. But when I stopped working, I saw like how I was struggling with structure, that I was actually depressed. I needed work to actually get out of bed. Otherwise, I would stay stuck in bed and I would struggle to be disciplined and things like that. And so over time, I started seeing that I was not feeling good about myself, and there was a lot of things that were not going well, right? So it's when I started noticing that I was dealing with sex addiction that I started having like weird behaviors and dangerous behaviors, such as unprotected sex and things like that. And I started noticing that actually something weren't right. Like there were things in my life that on an emotional level that was not going well, and it was starting to catch up basically, right? And so at one point I became aware of all those things and I started to take a route of, I think, yeah, it started with when I started coming into contact with healers and the healing world. And I started with one healer who gave me a healing session. I had no idea like what healing, shamanic healing, or just healing was. Like I was not spiritual at all at that point. I was completely more like self-development oriented, completely 3D oriented, right? Ambitious and all of those things, right? So it's when I had, a healing session, I had a Kundalini awakening and I started having a huge spiritual awakening. And so when that happened, I started being able to feel again. I started reconnecting with my body, basically. I started purging out emotions. Like I started discovering emotions. Like, for instance, I used to not cry and I started crying again and things like that. So it really triggered like a lot of things that I had in my body that needed to come out. And that also made me realize like how disconnected from my emotions I was, how I wasn't like present with my emotions and how much I was disconnected basically. So, and that's when I started to discover like healing and discover emotional work and discover like the more emotional part of self like self actualization. There's like obviously a strong mind and like healing your self-esteem, healing like your self-perception and like showing yourself that you're not that bad, if that makes sense. And at that point I was more in a space of like trauma healing, and trauma that affected my body image, that affected my behavior in relationships. I had a lot of abandonment wounds. I would suppress myself easily. I felt like certain traits still of my personality was not okay and was bad. And also due to sexual trauma, I was often feeling like I was this broken thing, right? And so I started going into a path of healing trauma and understanding where all of that was coming from. And I started being able to heal like my body image and actually not feel anxious about my body, learning to actually heal that and actually heal my relationship with my body, actually heal my eating disorder, actually doing this and that, and understanding like the concept of healing in different situations and things like that, right? And also acknowledging like how in certain situation I did have like kind of a mood, like kind of a, borderline toxic traits where when I would feel abandoned, for instance, I would become extremely abusive and things like that. And just understanding that I was dealing with mental health issues and actually recognizing that and actually seeking help for that and actually working, but with this consciousness of that and alongside with emotional healing and things like that. And so I started seeing that, well, my self-perception is healing because I'm addressing trauma, because trauma can really alter your self-perception. And so what I discovered was like, for instance, I was also like someone who was, sexually explorative, or at least like very direct when it comes to sex, and very, you know, cu curious and express myself sexually. I was a sexual person, for instance, but due to a lot of trauma, first of all, I felt like it was a bad thing for a woman to be like that, that I would also attract abuse. Like, obviously, I experienced that. And so I was not feeling comfortable being my sexual self, for instance, which was very sexual, but seen as, for instance, promiscuous and things like that. And as a teenager, when I started exploring, it was not in a healthy way because obviously I was in a self-destructive mindset and not a healthy explorative mindset, which was different. But so I understood that, sexuality was a big part of my life, was something that was important, there was nothing to be ashamed of. And also discovering like healing sexually and having sexual healing and things like that. Understanding that, well, I'm allowed to feel pleasure and things like that. And due to sexual trauma, I was not able to feel pleasure. I was disconnected from pleasure. So I was seeking pleasure, but I was never able to really connect with it on the deep level instead of just on the surface level. So there was a lot of things. And in terms of like self-perception, I was just always feeling like there was something wrong with me, around my sexuality, that like I was not like all the girls. I was not I had to hide this. I had to portray this nice girl. I grew up being asked to just be this nice girl, but there was part of me that was highly suppressed, that oftentimes would be really looked down on, and especially because I had like I have a personality that can be very, bubbly and things like that, because I'm a Gemini, but my, real personality that I will be in most of the time is a very reserved personality because I'm a Scorpio rising. So I can be very quiet. I can be very, I'm not a very, I don't like small talk and things like that. I'm neurodivergent, so I'm not like really into like social stuff, right? So in social circumstances, I would be extremely quiet, because I only, get talkative if we're speaking about deep stuff. But other than that, I'm not, I don't like small talk and things like that, which there's nothing wrong with that, absolutely not. But it's just like, it's not my thing, right? So like I also get really drained in social situations. I'm not really social butterfly. It's draining more than nourishing, which can be different from one person to another. Again, but I know that those things were also like really looked down on, and so I was always called like, "Oh, you're too timid. Why are you too quiet? Oh, it's like making me feel uncomfortable. You're not really social," and people would just feel like awkward around me, and things like that. So I always felt like, oh, I need to be social. I need to be a social butterfly to be liked, because I was always also seeking for people's validation, right? So there were different things that I felt ashamed of, and also my love for sex, my appreciation for sex, my devotion to sex, and my like just my directness, because I'm someone, again, like I have a very masculine approach to sex, like, because it's just my traits. Again, women have masculine traits as well, but I'm just very like straightforward when it comes to that. And I know that was also like, I always felt like, oh, I shouldn't be like that. I should be more feminine about it, or I don't know, like more not too direct and things like that. And feeling like, well, that's why, like, I'm not finding someone, or no one wants to be with me and things like that, right? And like different things like that, like I was I was more into like exploring like deep stuff. I was into deep stuff, and very curious and things like that. So basically and I always felt like, well, there's something wrong with me, and I shouldn't be this way, basically, about different things about me. I just felt like, oh, I shouldn't be this way. I shouldn't be too sexual. I should be too quiet. I need to be more social. I cannot be reserved. I cannot be like quiet. I need to speak. Like, if I want to be quiet, I cannot honor that. I have to speak. I have to make conversations with people, because otherwise they're going to feel uncomfortable, and they're going to be like, why are you not talking? And when, today, for instance, I have friends, I have people in my life that I can be quiet with, because in a conversation, I get quiet, and they are able to be in my presence without getting triggered. And because they are able to receive also that silence, to reflect on themselves as well, because silence in a conversation also can give the opportunity to the other person to actually reflect on themselves. And it's a space of authenticity, and there's nothing wrong with not talking a lot with people in conversations in their presence. Like, I remember I used to think, well, oh, with this person, there's never a silence in the conversation. We're always talking, talking, talking. And that's a good sign, when actually the relationships where I felt like that were never authentic relationships. And the moment I would start being myself, it would not work out, right? And even if like you're speaking a lot with each other, and like, you have a lot to say, it's good to have silence sometimes, in a relationship. It's important, in a friendship or whatever, so, and today I have people with whom I can do that. And I remember when I met my husband, I was just like, I'm just not gonna speak a lot. Please, like, I'm just gonna warn you. Like, we can go do stuff, and do stuff and hang out and things like that when we started dating. But I was just like, I'm just gonna tell you, I don't speak a lot. Like, if that makes you uncomfortable, let's just cut it there, because like, I'm not gonna I don't suppress myself anymore. I don't pretend to be someone I'm not. I don't people please anymore. So like, I'm just warning you. Like, I'm not a talker. I like to sometimes not speak and be with someone and not talk, because talking is exhausting sometimes to me. And my husband was just like, well, it's funny you mentioned that, because I'm exactly like you. I'm not a talker, so we're just going to stand in silence with each other, and make love to each other, and not have necessarily to talk a lot, right? So over time, I started also seeing like there's a lot of trait in my personality that was just rejecting, that were just part of who I was, right? And I hadn't learned to embrace it. I learned to reject it completely. And so And so even when, so that's when, I went into psychology and took a different, like, finished coaching. Then I took the route of psychology and studying such psychology and going back to studying psychology and things like that. And to this day, that's what I wanted to say. I'm gonna try to not take like attention because I tend to do that. So I'm just gonna try to stick with the subject. So, what was I saying again? Yeah. So, okay, so today I'm still working on it. Like, I have worked a lot on it, but I cannot say that I've completely like healed like my self-perception. But I've healed a lot of things that were, tarnishing my self-perception for sure. For instance, when it comes to, body image, I have worked through a lot of it to just feel comfortable with all the different bodies I have. Sometimes I'm going to be thinner, sometimes I'm going to be more curvier, and just embrace, not stop living because of my body. Because I used to feel like, well, especially if I would gain weight, I wanted to always be extremely thin because it felt safer due to sexual abuse. And when I would be curvier, I would feel unsafe because, well, obviously, when you're curvier, although a lot of people will say, yeah, but it's just because it's ugly. Well, I personally believe that when you're curvier, sometimes it's also because, well, you're going to be seen more, you're going to take up a little bit more space. And so obviously people are going to notice you more than when you're thin and you're just, we don't see much, right? And when you have a little bit of curves, well, we see it. So it's not that it's negative, but I know that for me, it was really unsafe to have a woman's body, basically. So being thin was very much safer for me, felt safer. So when I would gain weight, I would get anxious. I would get like, I would feel like, oh my God, like I am not safe. I'm not gonna be loved. I'm literally gonna be rejected and things like that. And when it comes to also like, being my sexual self and being myself, when it comes to like my sexuality with a partner, like I have over time learned to just, be myself. And especially because I know when I met my husband, it helped me a lot with my sexual healing. Although I did sexual healing before I met him, and I did sexual healing when it came to sex addiction and with myself and self-pleasuring differently, because I had a lot of shame. I felt like I couldn't self-pleasure, like looking at me self-pleasuring was just feel a lot like I was feeling extremely uncomfortable with that. So learning to get aroused by myself, learning to love seeing me having, orgasm and pleasuring myself and things like that, right? Not just being a porn addict or sex addict and just completely disconnected from pleasure, and for actually being the actor of my sexuality. I think I spoke about that on a TikTok, but I used to, because I did a TikTok, if you're interested, on sex addiction and my journey with sex addiction, you can check it out on TikTok. But I was basically, the actor, not the, no, I was passive. I was the spectator of my sexuality. I was not the actor of my sexuality. I wasn't in exploration. I was like, all of that was not, I was disconnected from that. So when I did sexual healing, it helped me become the actor of my sexuality. And so a lot of shame about me orgasming, a lot of shame of the way I behaved in bed. I used to be only a performer in bed. I never knew how to actually be myself in bed because I had a lot of shame about who I am, and thinking, well, if I really orgasm like that, it's not like I have been shown for the, like I always performed for the male gaze. I didn't actually have sex for me, for my pleasure and actually connecting with someone and just showing myself authentically. So it was always performing, looking good. It had always to do with I had to look good, physically look good, perform well. It was all about making the man fall in love with me. It was never about my pleasure, me having a good time, right? So I had a lot of shame around what I looked like in bed, how my body looked like in bed, how I was performing in bed, how me having an orgasm looked like. I didn't feel comfortable having an orgasm with someone. Like there was a lot of shame. So, I know that when also I met my husband, not to say that you have to, like, it's not because he was my husband, like, it can be just a partner, it can just be someone. But I know that over time, even before I met my husband, meeting people and having sexual partners, I started slowly also being able to be myself in, like, sexually with people. It started with partners that I met, and and just like starting slowly to be myself, but also obviously in our patriarchal society, as if it's so hard for us, right? Women. Like it's like you're trying to heal trauma, you're trying to heal yourself, but then there's patriarchy coming in, sweeping in, and kicking you in the butt. But so I was trying in with sexual partners to start, having a voice, and so at one point I met a guy, and in this relationship I started like healing as well, and I started, communicating what I needed, etc., etc. And I started having a voice in relationships, and especially when it comes to sex, to express like, well, I would like to too fast, too slow, whatever. Like I started understanding, like, and also asking for what I love, like, you know, and that kind of also, was not always easy, because obviously you have to have someone in front of you who's like willing to be receptive as well, and willing to hear you, and like who's not selfish. And a lot of men can be selfish. Like it's quite rare to come across, like, you have to come across someone basically who's not selfish. Basically, when it comes to men, it's not always easy to have someone in front of you who's like actually willing to not be too selfish. Although they are men who are not too selfish, but it's not always easy, right? But so when I met my husband, I met a guy, basically made a guy who was really open, and who was really like made me feel extremely comfortable being myself. And it became very intuitive also. It became very natural. Like I didn't even have to ask. I didn't even have to explain. I didn't even have to express. He was just like came in and just tuned in with me, and it just became very natural, and I was just able to express myself, and it made it very easy, right? So basically over time I was able to like express myself, have a voice, and also like just be myself in bed without shame, and just letting, and so my self-perception today is not completely healed. There's still things that I'm working on. There's still things that, trauma I'm working through. But all of that to say that I was able to heal a lot of my self-perception, and I saw how what the difference it made, and how like it's incredible how as children, when we're wired in a certain way, when we have negative feedback or we're abused, how much of ourselves we reject, and how it makes us perceive ourselves in a certain way. Because I used to perceive myself as ugly. I used to perceive myself as not really intelligent. I used to perceive myself as like damaged. I was yeah, I was like too sexual. I was like, I used to really have a negative perception of myself, ugly from head to toe, like literally. So, and sometimes our like if we've went through a lot of trauma, our self perception is definitely going to be altered. There's no way around it. And that self perception can lead us to compromise ourselves in relationships. It can lead us to to have a lot of like mental health issues as well, to lead us to be disconnected from life, from things that we would enjoy. to, lead us to suppress ourselves in general, and not being able to, welcome everything in all life's abundance, right? And it's there's a difference between seeing like our flaws or things we can work on to be better, and have an altered and negative self-perception that is not accurate to the reality, right? And healing our self-perception is so important. Healing your self-perception is so important. If you feel like today you're struggling with your self-perception, it's so important to understand that sometimes when we have really a negative self-perception and we have a negative talk, and there's areas in our lives where we don't express ourselves fully and we can feel we're suppressing ourselves, sometimes it has to do with trauma more than anything. Because what I saw on my journey was also like, I started seeing that I could do things, I was capable of things, but sometimes self-perception can be so deep that we're not really conscious of it, and it's like it shows up in different situations, right? Because you can be someone who's has a great job, works out a lot. From an external point of view, I was very disciplined. I used to box. I used to do like fitness every day, go to the gym every day. I used to be very good at my job. I was usually like kind of, not a team leader, but I would just often, yeah, be someone who would, have ideas at work. People, would create a nice work environment, would get along with people and things like that. Like from an external point of view, I had it all. Like I was someone who was confident and things like that, right? And like I was studying at the same time, like everything from an external point of view, I was good, right? But then when I would deal with criticism, I would start like self-indulging, drinking, or calling my like calling a booty call and having sex. Like when it comes to the emotional stuff, there were things that I was dealing with that people would not see. At work, I was actually a perfectionist. I would often take a lot of the workload, and I would end up burning out because nobody was working as hard as me. I would end up like, um, you know, uh, yeah, working too much, overworking myself. I would end up overworking at the gym and end up exhausted, burning my body out. My stress level were up. I would struggle with relationships. I can commit. I was afraid of commitment. I would just only have casual relationships. I was suffering from sex addiction. People would never, knew that. Literally, I would come back from work, right? And I remember one time it was that moment of light bulb moment. I came back from work and I was literally like, came out of the subway, started to talking to a guy, and 5 minutes later, we were literally nearly having sex in a park. Like nobody would have think that of me. Like nobody would have known. Nobody. I was also to a point where I would host like I would use platforms, that where you can host travelers, and I would only select men to come, and I would host them, like literally thinking, well, I want like literally to have sex, or maybe have the opportunity to have sex, or just out of loneliness as well. Like I would host people, but like only guys, because in the back of my mind, I was like, maybe I could meet, like I need sex, right? So, and just putting, like, I literally hosted two Russian guy one day. I was alone. Like anything could have happened. I was just like not serious at all. I was out of control. Like it was not rational of me to do that. I could have got raped so easily. Like nobody would have known. So it's like putting myself in certain position, and yet from an external point of view, everyone would think, well, oh, she got it together, right? But I didn't get it together, and I still had a negative, like a lot of trauma, and I still felt like I couldn't be loved. I still felt like something was wrong with me. I still felt, had issues with being too hard on myself, feeling I had to prove myself to everyone, feeling like I was inadequate, which would push me to go to extremes in so many areas of my life. Being a perfectionist is one of them. When you have a negative self-perception, perfectionism emanates from there because you you feel like you need to prove something and you need to be flawless because you've never been given the space to actually learn. You were abused, you were always criticized when you would make a mistake. There was no space for mistake. You were expected to not be a child, basically. You were expected to not be a human being. And so you, as an adult, don't expect yourself to be a human being. You don't expect yourself, you don't give yourself the space to learn. You don't give yourself the space to fall. You don't give yourself, like, you then so hard on yourself in return. And you feel like when you fail, well, that means I'm just incapable. And feeling this sense of I'm incapable, I'm not capable, I'm stupid, or whatever is whatever you've been through, right? So, there's so much in our self-perception. What I found on my journey is that there's so much in our self-perception that has to do not only with what people repeated to us, although we have to do that work of discovering who we are and understanding how we work and putting ourselves out there and overcoming our fears, getting out of our comfort zone to actually get to know ourselves. That's 100%. And that sometimes with people who didn't have trauma, were not abused, right? Is enough to just understand, well, my self-perception is different and things like that. Like and that can be enough. But if like you've been abused, emotionally abused or things like that, neglected severely and just rejected and experienced those, deep trauma, um, and just even rejection, well, there's a lot of trauma that is gonna on the emotional level is gonna play out also a lot when it comes to your self-perception. So maybe one person who's been maybe a little criticized but loved but just criticized, well, they will go out in the world and do things differently and just start perceiving themselves differently, and that will be it, right? But if you had trauma and childhood trauma, were abused, neglected, or whatever, any type of situation where you had to go into survival mode to get the affection and get the attention you needed, because because people would withhold that from you, then on an emotional level, the emotional level will affect your self-perception. And so there's so much in the emotional level that needs to be healed for your self-perception to truly heal, right? And for me, trauma healing really changed the game for me because I needed to address those things on an emotional level to actually really heal my self-perception and not feel anymore all that shame. Even though I'm still working through it, but the big portion of that shame left, a big portion of a lot of things left, right? And I was really able to start, blossoming, connect with pleasure as a woman also, because I feel like for women who have experienced, child abuse and sexual abuse more specifically, it disconnects you from pleasure. It disconnects you. It's so horrible. It's the worst thing as a woman because then it's so hard to connect with pleasure. You have shame around it. It's so complicated, right? So like being able to because your self-perception will then hold you back from everything that you can experience on an emotional level, right? So being able to just be yourself, like being able to just be myself sexually, just be my authentic self, and just being able to just express myself, have a voice in relationships, be myself, things like that, like can be altered by your self-perception feeling like, well, I cannot show my authentic self, or not feeling that you cannot show your authentic self, but just being blocked, like emotionally just having things on an emotional level holding you back from expressing your authentic self. That is when trauma plays out, you know? Sometimes when it's trauma playing out, usually you cannot really explain it. It's just that you block, like it blocks, and you cannot go further. You cannot connect with pleasure. You don't know how to, it's not on a logical, it's not just a belief, it's an emotional trauma. So like you really have to work through what traumatized basically your psyche, that when it is in this situation, it's blocked out. And the feeling you feel is like, well, you know, I feel ashamed in bed, I feel this and feel that, right? I feel this about my body. But it's more of like feeling rather than, I don't know if I'm capable of that, or like I or I don't deserve love. I feel like, you know, like, oh, I'm just like this horrible person. Oh, somebody who loves me. Wow, I'm so lucky to be loved. And wow, like that would be more of like, you know, also people repeating to you that you're, you know, you're too difficult, you're this or you're that, and like just feeling, you know, like, or just when it comes to suppressing yourself, it could just be like people have told you that that's annoying, you know, over and over again, right? Stop doing that, it's annoying. Or you shouldn't be like that, it's too much, it's too this, right? People like projecting on you. And those things, like, once you see, those things can be easily healed, because once someone can tell you, well, that's like an asset, that's amazing, that's positive for you, that's amazing, right? You can easily start questioning people's perception of you. But when it comes to trauma and emotional trauma, it's different, because it's so deeply ingrained in your psyche that you literally need to work through the emotional thing to actually get rid. It's not just on the logical thinking, and you don't it's not just repeating things to yourself, it's actually healing the trauma, if that makes sense. So yeah, in my opinion, our self-perception is something that is the most important to heal, adjust, and work through. And sometimes that can be so subtle that we don't realize that we're struggling with our self-perception, and it can really hold us back from being authentic self, setting boundaries with people, taking up space in the world as well. And I know for me, since I've embarked on healing, on my healing journey, and actually addressed trauma, I started taking up more space in the world. I, you know, at one point in my life, like hopping on the internet and speaking about my experience was the most, I was so afraid of that. Like it was just, and just having like a social account and putting myself out there was just like, I couldn't, like, I was so scared of it. I would just shake just thinking of it. And the more I embarked on this healing journey and worked through my traumas, the more I was able to take up more space, which I keep doing today and keep taking up more space. Um, but literally, I remember like if I would hop on the internet, the amount of like how judgmental I would be so hard on myself. I would feel like I would not, even when you don't like, you know, when you, I used to hate my face and hearing my voice and things like that. And that's just sign of trauma, like self-perception and negative self-perception wiring when you were a child, right? It's like deep trauma in that case, because like you feel a lot of feelings of rejection of yourself. And so that's like a lot, that shows a lot of abuse that you've experienced as a child as well. When you cannot, like when you struggle to like appreciate yourself and things like that, and you feel a lot of rejection while seeing yourself, that's self-perception. When you're a perfectionist, when you're hard on yourself, same, self-rejection and difficulty with your self-perception. Healthy self-perception means you're able to look at the positive things you said. You are able to appreciate what you're doing. You're able to hype yourself up, basically. You're able to be your fan. You don't need people's validation. You are able to be your cheerleader, and basically always being the one saying, you know, if you have sometimes even some doubts, or, you know, you feel maybe self-conscious a little bit, that's human, but just you're always going to be the one saying, well, you know, that look at all these positive things, and like, oh, you shouldn't, you shouldn't worry about that. Like that's just a detail. Like it doesn't matter. You're so beautiful, whatever. Like you're gonna be your own cheerleader, right? And I remember being my first hater for sure. I used to be my biggest hater. So you want healing your self-perception is all about, in my opinion, like becoming your cheerleader, becoming your biggest fan. And if you know, it's not your fault that people were not able to love you, but it doesn't have to prevent you from loving yourself and actually healing your trauma and actually becoming your biggest cheerleader if you still feel like you have trauma to heal. And if it's not, if you don't have trauma to heal, like go out there, go try things that you've never tried before, get out of your comfort zone and just discover how amazing you are, discover how incredible you are, discover your strength, discover the positive aspects of you that maybe people didn't take the time to mirror back to you and to make you realize, you know, if they were always criticizing you, well, go and discover who you are really and the positive side of you. Because if otherwise, you're just going to be focused on the negative side of you. Go out there and see how strong, amazing you are and all the positive things about you, right? So that you can really bring your purpose into the light and you can actually be your authentic self in this lifetime, because our purpose is to be our authentic self. That is going to look like this is going to be different from one person to another. Some of us might be incredible singers, some of us might be incredible healers, some of us will be doing, I don't know, like different things, you know, like poems, art, or it can be journalism, or it can be politics. Like we're all came here for different things, right? And our purpose is to embody our authentic self, is to do in the work we need to do to start embodying our authentic self. It doesn't have to be perfect, like, but just embodying our authentic self more and more, and and being able to put our message out there, being able to bring the medicine we're meant to bring or the art we're meant to bring, whatever that is. But that's why self-perception is so important, because that can really hold us back. And that definitely held me back for such a long time from so much beautiful things, just even enjoying certain things of life that I thought, well, everybody, you know, experienced that. Sex is not that incredible. Oh my God, sex can be incredible. Sex can be incredible if we're able to surrender to it, if we're able to actually, yeah, surrender to to it and not have anything holding us back and feeling, you know, weird about it. So yeah, if you're interested, if you feel like you want to explore trauma healing, I've created a free webinar on how to heal trauma if you're interested in diving deeper into that subject. Otherwise, if you feel like you need to go out there, just go out there and discover how amazing you are, because come on, you are amazing and you have so much gifts to bring to the world. You have so much things to bring to the world, and there's no reason to hold yourself back. There's no reason to, yeah, to hold yourself back and to believe what people have told you and projected on you because they were insecure. And yeah, that's for this episode. I hope you enjoyed. It was amazing uh, creating this episode. I love creating this episode. Thank you for being here and watching until the end. In the meantime, I'm wishing you a beautiful December time and Christmas period. I hope you're enjoying with your loved ones, enjoying with yourself first and foremost. And in the meantime, until the next episode, I'm wishing you well, sister. Keep rising and keep shining. Sending you much love. Mwah.